You ever see thousands of birds flying in perfect unison? Or a huge herd of wildebeest that just knows where to go? It's the magic of collective migration. But what if I told you that the very same hidden rules that guide those epic journeys also literally built your face? Today, we're going to uncover the universal principles of the herd and what they can teach all of us about survival in a changing world.
All right, let's dive right in. You know, there's something just primal about watching a massive migration, isn't there? It's this raw, powerful force of nature that's just impossible to look away from.
I mean, just picture it. 1,000,000 wildebeest thundering across the Serengeti. Or that swirling cloud of starlings, a murmuration, painting the evening sky. These aren't just chaotic mobs running around. Nope, they're basically acting as one single superorganism. And this strategy? It's how they find food and stay safe across huge landscapes. It's a massive success story across the animal kingdom.
Okay, but here's where it gets really wild. This exact same kind of collective movement, well, it doesn't just happen out on the plains of Africa. It happened inside the embryo that eventually became you. So what on earth could a herd of caribou have in common with the tiny cells that migrated to form the bones and cartilage of your face? Well, the answer is actually way more profound than you might think.
So how is any of this even possible? Turns out all this incredibly complex group behavior, from a flock of birds to a cluster of your own cells, it all comes down to just 3 beautifully simple rules.
So, rule number 1 is all about personal space. It's repulsion. Seriously, think of it like social distancing for animals. Every single bird, every fish, every cell, it just tries to keep a little buffer zone around it, steering away from its neighbors so they don't have one big, chaotic pileup.
But of course, if everyone just stayed away from each other, you wouldn't have a group at all, right? That's where rule number 2 comes in, attraction. While they're avoiding collisions, they're also being gently pulled toward the center of the group. It's like the social glue that holds the entire herd together.
And finally, for the group to actually go somewhere with purpose, there's rule number 3, alignment. Basically, everyone just tries to match the direction and speed of their neighbors. And what's really incredible is how efficient this is. A single starling in one of those huge, swirling murmurations, it doesn't need a bird's eye view of the whole flock. Nope, it just has to watch its 6 or 7 closest neighbors. That's it. And that's enough to create that breathtaking, coordinated dance in the sky.
So there you have it. Repulsion, attraction, and alignment. 3 simple rules. But the real magic here is that these rules don't require a leader or even a brain. They can scale all the way down to the microscopic level.
And this is the part that just blows my mind. The exact same principles that guide a flock of birds are at work inside you, right now. During development, when you are an embryo, when your body is healing a wound, even in the spread of cancer, your cells are communicating. They're pushing and pulling and aligning with each other to navigate the super complex landscape of your body.
Now, this flocking behavior is easiest to see in a special type of cell called mesenchymal cells. You see, unlike other cells that are kind of locked together in tight sheets, like bricks in a wall, these guys form looser groups. Their connections are weaker, which lets them flow and rearrange themselves, a lot like a herd on the move.
So if these rules really are so universal, how can we test them? I mean, what happens when the world these groups are trying to navigate is constantly changing? Well, to figure that out, scientists are now building virtual worlds and, you guessed it, digital herds.
This is really the big question they're trying to answer. In a nice, stable world, migration routes that are passed down for generations were perfectly fine. But what happens when something like climate change shifts where all the food is? Can the herd adapt? Or is it just doomed to follow its own outdated traditions?
So to crack this, scientists basically created a recipe for a virtual herd. They gave their digital animals a few key behaviors. A little bit of curiosity, so they'd explore randomly, a natural pull towards food, obviously, and of course our 3 social rules. But here's the secret sauce. They gave the herd 2 kinds of memory. A long-term ancestral memory, kind of like an ancient map passed down for generations, and a short-term working memory of what they learned just last year.
Then, they dropped this herd into a simulated world with changing seasons. In these models, you had patches of resources, think of them as summer and winter pastures, that would pop up and then disappear over a 100-day cycle. The herd's one big challenge? To figure out how to track these moving targets year after year after year.
So, the big question is, how did the virtual herd do? How does this mix of social instinct and memory actually help them adapt when their whole world gets turned upside down? And this right here shows the model in action so brilliantly. Okay, so the herd starts with a bad map. Their ancestral memory is just plain wrong. But look at what happens. Over 40 simulated generations, the herd, through a mix of individual exploring and social learning, figures out the correct path. Their short-term successes actually rewrite their flawed long-term memory. It's amazing.
But here's where it gets really, really interesting. The researchers found this fascinating trade-off. The size of the social group is absolutely critical. As the paper puts it, the group needs to be big enough to actually notice the changes in the environment, but not so big that a good idea gets lost in the crowd.
In other words, there is a sweet spot. For a group to really thrive, it needs just the right balance between doing its own thing and conforming to the group. Too much isolation, and they can't share good information, but too much togetherness, and they fall into groupthink, where a new, innovative idea just gets ignored. Real resilience is found right there in that perfect middle ground.
And this chart shows that sweet spot in action. When the scientists simulated climate change by making those food patches slowly drift over time, it was the medium-sized swarms that adapted the best. Small swarms, they couldn't gather enough info to keep up. And the really large swarms? Well, the correct new information was just too diluted to change the herd's behavior. They just kept following that outdated ancestral map, basically right off a cliff. So what is the big takeaway from all of this? Why should we care about how a bunch of virtual animals finds its way?
Well, it shows us that the whole wisdom of the crowd thing has its limits. It's a double-edged sword. There's a really fine line between group resilience and total catastrophic failure. Collective intelligence isn't some automatic magic trick. It's a fragile thing that depends on having just the right network size. Too much connection, and you get groupthink. Too little, and you get chaos. Real resilience comes from building a system where new ideas can be discovered but also shared effectively without getting lost in all the noise.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If the survival of a herd, or a cluster of cells, depends on this super careful dance between tradition and innovation, between old memory and new information, what does that say about us? How do we, in our own complex societies, find that perfect sweet spot to navigate the incredibly rapid changes of our modern world?